In this second review of the evening, we are talking about The Rack, which is the 1956 film adaptation of the teleplay by Rod Serling that was on the U.S. Steel Hour in 1955, which I have already reviewed on this episode. But the film adaptation came out in 1956. It is available to watch, to rent, and buy. I think it's available to rent, but it is definitely available to buy on Vudu/Fandango at home. And before we get into kind of our thoughts on it, I'm going to run through the cast and everything, if you don't mind indulging me, Tiny.
Sure.
Okay, so we will be spoiling the movie, probably. I'm not going to bother with like a spoiler, non-spoiler, since I've already reviewed the teleplay. But the premise, according to IMDb, is a decorated Korean War hero inexplicably collaborates with the enemy while interred in a POW camp and is court-martialed. The director was Arnold Laven, who I didn't get his background on that. Sorry, but writer for it was Stewart Stern, adapted from Serling's teleplay, of course. This was his only time working with or adjacent to Serling, so he didn't work on Twilight Zone or Night Gallery or anything like that. However, a notable credit of his is that he, I think, co-wrote the screenplay, or maybe he just wrote the screenplay for Rebel Without a Cause, which you and I and our friend Ben reviewed in episode 366 of The Obsessive Viewer.
Good movie.
Yeah. And so the cast, running down the cast, we've got Paul Newman. He plays Captain Edward W. Hall Jr., his other collaborations with Serling, he had one where in December of 1954, he appeared in an episode of Danger, which was written by Serling. The episode was titled Knife in the Dark. It's interesting. The plot summary for that is prison inmate Jeff had his best friend murdered by the sadistic Willie. To save himself, Jeff tells the warden he didn't do it. So that's pretty interesting. I didn't look up to see if that's available online anywhere. But I believe it was one of those like live teleplay anthology series, like stage production things. And then as Sam Moulton is Wendell Corey, who he was also in the Rack TV episode. Walter Pidgeon plays Edward Hall Sr. This is his only collaboration with Serling. And then we've also got Edmond O'Brien, who appeared in 7 Days in May, which you and I reviewed in Anthology episode 64. And he also appeared in the Playhouse 90 teleplay The Comedian, which I covered in episode 30 of the podcast. And his other collaboration with Serling was a 1966 TV movie titled The Doomsday Flight, which was written by Serling. And then running down the rest of the cast, just real quick, we've got Anne Francis as Aggie Hall. She appeared in 2 Twilight Zone episodes. Those 2 were The After Hours and Jess Bell. We've also got Lee Marvin, who appeared also in 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone, The Grave and Steel. And then we've also got Cloris Leachman, who appeared in 2 Twilight Zones. The one original Twilight Zone, It's a Good Life, and its sequel in the 2000s, It's Still a Good Life. She also appeared in Mr. Finchley versus the Bomb, which was an episode of the Kaiser Aluminum Hour in 1956, written by Serling. She also appeared in one segment of Night Gallery in 1972. And the final 2 pieces of cast is James Best, who appeared in 3 Twilight Zones, including The Grave, The Last Rites of Jeff Myrtlebank, and Jess Bell. And rounding out the cast, we've got Barry Atwater, who appeared in 1 episode of The Twilight Zone, one of my personal favorites, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. He also appeared in the Night Gallery pilot in a 1973 episode of Night Gallery titled The Doll of Death. Okay, so that is the cast and crew rundown. Tiny, are you still awake?
I am here, buddy.
Nice. Yeah, so let's dive in to the Rack. Once again, we are going to be filtering in and out with spoilers. So fair warning, we're going to be potentially spoiling this movie. So Tiny, I enlisted you to watch The Rack. How did you feel about it when you watched it? How'd you feel about The Rack? And we should also note that you haven't seen the TV episode.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't able to squeeze that one in. But I really enjoyed the movie. I went into it not really knowing anything about it at all, other than Paul Newman's in it. So I really loved it. It's classic Rod Serling. He holds a mirror up to society and says, "Hey, this is this is part of our society. Is this right? Or how do we feel about this? Or, you know, any number of commentaries on, you know, the zeitgeist or societal norms or abnorms, you know, and this totally does that. I think the context of when this film was made, the backdrop of the Korean War, it was filmed in 1956. The war was still super fresh on everyone's mind. This is a time where, you know, people still felt a certain way about military service and how psychology relates to military service. And you know, it was still kind of mysterious, but maybe we were learning more, and this movie touches on that idea. And it ultimately has kind of a progressive approach to it. I think, you know, it's kind of cliche to say, but it was kind of ahead of its time, I think. And that was really fun to watch, and just fascinating, I think, to be at our age in 1956. You know, how would we feel about this? Like, would we, you know, given again the societal attitudes towards psychiatry and how it relates to military service and what a person can endure, like the opinions on that, how would we have felt back then? Like, I'm sure you and I probably feel a certain way about how this person was treated in this movie. But it's because we're alive in 2024. You know, we have our opinions 70 years after this movie was made. It's just so fun to think about that. Think about the societal implications of that, and it really gets your gears turning. And that's what's awesome about Rod Serling's writing.
I wholeheartedly agree. Obviously, like, I'm such just a fan of Rod Serling's writing, obviously. But yeah, it's so interesting because I watched the TV episode first and then watched the movie. And something that struck me about both, and I'm sure I bring this up in the TV review as well, but like, it's just the way that Serling, like what I found really interesting is that the script follows the Serling teleplay pretty closely. It expands on it because it's a longer work, obviously. But it still captures, it still keeps that level of social commentary and that unique position that Serling has in that first iteration of it. And by that I mean, like, his background, obviously, Rod Serling, he was in World War II in the Pacific Theater. He saw just horrendous things. Like, he was very affected by it, obviously, and that really brought a lot. It filtered a lot into his writing, and that's something I really appreciate about The Rack, is that it's not this like jingoistic, like hoorah, like American military might, American strength. It is diving deeper into that psychological effects of war, psychological effects of what a person can endure. And it doesn't paint a picture. It doesn't paint it as like military bad, human individuality good. It has these layers to it where it's like, yeah, we're going to court-martial this soldier, not only because he collaborated with the enemy, but because of the bigger implications of it. That, yeah, what does this mean for the military? Like, the entire like meaning of military, like if one member of the military crumbles under this pressure, like, that creates such a whirlpool of, like, a leak within the military machine, that, like, if one person isn't punished for not being able to withstand something, what does that mean for people who are going to be withstanding these things or encountering these things going forward in future conflicts? Like, there's just a big macro viewpoint of what it means for the military and for the military industrial complex and all of these other like things that I found just so riveting, because as like as like an a-hole millennial guy, like, I just kind of even so far into this project that I'm doing with Anthology, where I am steeping myself in classic television, classic science fiction, classic social commentary, I still find it so interesting when I'm watching art that's made so far in the past that is as progressive as it is, and as forward thinking and as three-dimensionally thought out, in multifaceted, and it isn't just like a propaganda piece for the military or anything, which is probably a naive position to come to the work from on my part, but it's nonetheless just really interesting when I see that nuance. And it's surprising because of the context of when it was made, but it's not surprising given the pedigree of the author of the work being Rod Serling. So
right,
yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why my favorite, not my favorite, but one of the more interesting characters in the film is the one played by Wendell Corey, the Major Sam Moulton. He's like basically the prosecutor. I love the way it was set up because early on in the movie, before the trial starts and all that, he's very reluctant. He has a personal opinion about how this needs to be handled, but he's also a soldier who's going to do his duty. And I really love his approach, the character's approach early on in the movie, where he calls him into his office and says, "Hey, you're going to be court-martialed." He's very professional with him, and he's like, "Hey, I'm trying to be courteous to you." And I think he, in a roundabout way, says, without coming out and saying it, he says, I understand what you did. You're a human being, and the Army is asking you not to be a human being, and that's not fair. And I think he conveyed that he's very reluctant to prosecute him, but again, he has a job to do. And I loved the understanding between both of them in that scene. And then of course you get to the trial, and he's a completely different person. He's totally prosecutor, laser beam, take this guy down mode. And he fucking takes him to task. Like there's a point later on in the movie where I'm like, how is this not leading the witness? How is this not kind of badgering the witness a little bit? But I maybe a military tribunal is different, or whatever. A military trial is different. Maybe they have different rules. But I was watching some of it, and I was like, why aren't the judges jumping in here? Or like, why isn't someone objecting here? This is kind of rough. But it was also very dramatic. So, that was. I think that character kind of exemplifies the attitude, or maybe the general kind of feel of, hey, this is a tricky situation here. I like that.
Oh, absolutely. And the performances overall are just incredible. Like Paul Newman, obviously, dude's amazing.
Yes.
But like you said, Wendell Corey is fantastic as well. A little piece of trivia that is not meant to derail anything, so I apologize. But a piece of trivia is that for the sci-fi fans, Walter Pidgeon and Anne Francis are both in this movie as father-in-law and daughter-in-law. So we've got Anne Francis plays Aggie Hall, and then of course Walter Pidgeon plays Edward Hall Sr. They both appeared as father and daughter in the classic sci-fi film from 1956, Forbidden Planet. So pretty interesting, mildly interesting, but that's something that I can't. So I'm not entirely sure. I could be mistaken. I'm pretty sure I'm not mistaken, because I think it's in both things. But it's something that I really latched onto about this movie and this story is that the way it's presented, and I'm sure I will have said this before in my episode review, but the way it's presented, where Edward Hall Jr., just like it's not presented as a mystery. It's not like this military mystery thing where it's like, well, did he collaborate with the enemy? Did he do this? Instead, it's like, yeah, I did it. I'm going to cop to it. Like, it's not a did he or did he not. It's not a question of did he break under torture or under duress or anything. It's like, yeah, he did. Like, he's upfront about it. And then it's more just about like what should be expected of soldiers when they're in this situation. Like, what should be expected of them, and like is there really a punishment for someone not being able to withstand something that grave and mentally and physically and emotionally taxing and torturous?
Yeah, for sure.
So,
And
yeah.
I think just to kind of, this probably isn't necessary, but to qualify it, I always feel a little hesitant to comment on anything military, because it's like I'm a big believer in experience, and if you haven't experienced something, you really don't know. And I never served in the military, and so I remember when Serial podcast, their second season, they talked about the whole Bo Bergdahl thing. And I was listening to that podcast, and I was like, man, people just lit this guy up. Like, they were just like, he's a traitor, he deserves to be killed, and like, I mean, he's like all this horrible. I'm like, man, the guy was suffering in a PO. He was a POW for like a year or whatever, and he was held in a cage. This guy suffered, and like he, but I didn't serve in the military. I can't relate to how they feel having someone abandon their post like he did. And like, I don't know. I wanted to say that, like, I think it's easy to kind of sit back and look at this as civilians, if you will. But I think this movie kind of wants to appeal to civilians as well. Like, I think, it's not, I think the movie's asking anyone who sees it to think about this, right? It's not trying to get anyone to shy away from thinking about what this means and the implications of it, kind of like you were talking about before. So I don't think we're wrong to do that. I'm just saying, I feel like there's an element that people who weren't in the military can't always relate to or can't always take into consideration when it comes to something like this. And it's interesting to think about, and it's kind of a qualification you have to throw out there, I guess, when you're going to comment on it,
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, for the record, I've never served in the military. I do not have, I have never once had the physical or mental acumen to be a worthy candidate to even be considered to go to the military. Like, that is a level of person, like that is a level of skill that I will never have. Like, I could never do the military. But I do respect anyone who can just go in and do that. But what I do like about it, kind of going back to the storytelling of this, is that it's not necessarily painting the military as, the bad guy. It's not a clear cut, like, black and white. Oh, it's black and white, but it's not a clear cut like duology, I don't know, construct of good and bad, because it is showing that more three-dimensional view of both military, just the military culture and the military machinations of it, and the system of military, while also kind of having this battle of showcasing the humanity of Edward Hall and his capacity for withstanding what he withstood in the POW, in the prison camp in Korea. Like, having it's more about who he is as an individual, which I find so interesting, because so much of what I understand of the military, and from pop culture and from knowing people in the military and who have served and everything, it's like the entire construct of it is to break down the people in the military to be a unit that is able to work as one cohesive unit. And when one part of that breaks down, or it throws a wrench in everything. I don't know if that word salad made much sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So I just really appreciate that it went that far with it.
Yeah. Another thing that jumped out to me more creatively is the Aggie Hall character. I feel like Rod Serling is really good at writing women. And he was not afraid to make a female character the star of a episode or whatever. I'm thinking back to like the 16 millimeter shrine and the Hitchhiker, those are episodes of the Twilight Zone that have female stars, and they're not just like somebody's mom or like someone's wife, you know, like they're you know, like he had actual characters for women to play. And I feel like Aggie Hall, the character played by Ian Francis, you know, she's a widow, so I mean that's that's an aspect of it, but she's I think she had a lot to work with, and she was great. Like you were talking about performances earlier, everybody crushed their performances in this movie. They were all great, but she was one of the standouts to me. I thought she was fantastic. I love the way that she was. I think the easy route would have been like she kind of falls in love with Paul Newman's character or something like that, but that wasn't even on the table. Like no one was thinking that. Like it was you know, so it just plays and addresses to the creativity of the writing in the movie. But yeah, I think it was interesting to see how she wasn't like just a pretty girl, or you know, she was actually engaging with what the main character, what Edward Hall Jr. was going through, and like was trying to console him. She was there for him, and you know, she was a character who contributed to the narrative of the story. It wasn't just, she wasn't just there, you know. I just appreciated that about the movie and the writing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I kind of, so like with this movie, like it is adapted from Serling's script, and obviously it's expanded upon in a few places. One of the things I wasn't as kind of into with the original teleplay was the Aggie Hall character and Edward Hall Sr. I felt like they were slightly like it's not that they were underserved in the original teleplay, but it's that I wanted more. I wanted more of their, like how they kind of internalize what happens and what's going on and everything. And I got that from the movie. I feel like they expanded that pretty well, and I think they got really strong performances from Walter Pidgeon and Francis as well. Like there's a lot of good like quiet moments with her and with Edward Hall Sr. as well, that I feel like really helped mold the overall story that they were doing. So it's a good expansion from the original teleplay, in my opinion, that I think worked really well.
For sure.
Yeah. I had something on my mic. So, but yeah, let's see. What else do you have in mind about this? Oh, I do have some trivia if we don't have really much else to say about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Just one real piece of trivia is that from IMDb, no, I think this is from Wikipedia, but it's cited. Film was based on an episode of the United States Steel Hour, obviously. Let's see, screenwriter. Oh, so the director and screenwriter had been pushing for Paul Newman to be cast in the film after seeing him in other productions, but MGM's chief of production was opposed to it. So they gave screen tests, and they were kind of bouncing around ideas. They wanted Leslie Nielsen for the role. Glenn Ford was also offered the role. But what I find interesting about that is that the quote is that Glenn Ford declined the role, saying that he would never want to play a, quote, rat fink role. And it said that other actors declined for the same reason, which I find so interesting, because I think that that's an interesting reflection of how progressive this movie is, and how progressive it is to the point where it seems somewhat alienating from actors in Hollywood, because this is a time where it, as progressive as the movie is, or as forward thinking as it is, or even as nuanced as it was, I feel like there was still, judging from that quote and from the idea that multiple actors declined for the same reason, there was this idea that, you know, this character is like they view him two-dimensionally, like as someone who is like a rat who is someone who has done the unthinkable, who has done something that is unforgivable. And I find that so interesting because the movie paints him in such a way that he is sympathetic, but also he's not off the hook from it or anything. But he is a tortured person, both in the aftermath of his actual torture and in actually being tortured. I just find it so interesting that those layers exist in the finished product, but the actors that were in line for the role didn't want it because they didn't want, presumably they didn't want to play with those layers. I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't really have any other notes, except I will say another piece of trivia is that the original teleplay, quote from IMDb, the original teleplay writer Rod Serling liked the film adaptation, but he felt the film version could and should have shown some of the POW camp in flashbacks. And then he said that he did feel that the scene with the father and son alone was better written in the film version than in his original teleplay. Do you think the movie would have benefited from flashbacks to the actual camp sequences, or were you fine with it being strictly like courtroom drama after the fact?
I prefer that. I'm glad that they did it the way they did.
Nice.
I think it would have just gotten. I think it would have been a distraction, and I think it also made it more like the audience watching the movie is like a member of the jury. You know what I mean? And we're like, because we don't have the actual, again, kind of experience of seeing what happened and getting all those details. We have to go by his accounts and other people's accounts of what happened, just like a real courtroom and like a real trial. I think that kind of gave it a little bit of a level of authenticity that made it pretty interesting in my book.
I would have to absolutely agree. Not to besmirch the opinion of Mr. Rod Serling by any stretch, but I do feel that I feel that if they would have included any like flashbacks or like POW sequences in the movie, I feel like that would have been, I don't know if it necessarily would have made it a more sensationalized story or more or a less grounded drama, but I think that the potential for it to be the for it to be that or for it to detract from the grounded storytelling would have been there, and it would have been it would have been very hard for the film to navigate away from being like a sensationalized viewpoint of it, like, because the movie strikes such a strong balance between, like you said, us being like the audience being like jurors ourselves, like being kind of witness to the court proceedings and learning about the experience of Edward Hall and what happened through the actual court system, the court martial system, as opposed to actually seeing it in flashbacks. I think that would have really been detrimental to the more grounded story being told. So yeah, so I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah, totally.
Yep. So I think that is just about it that we've got for the rack. Any other thoughts that we didn't touch on this movie, Tiny?
I kind of, just real quick, I liked the ending. I liked how it was like, I feel like there could have been like more of a denouement, but then I also like the idea that it kind of stuck to sort of a trial format. Like, this is what it was decided, and that's final. Like, there's no sense in trying to think about this anymore because the sentence has been, I mean, it's been decided. This is what happened. This is how they ruled, and you're done. And that's the harsh reality of a trial. And so I kind of appreciated the ending. Like, at first I was like, oh man, I was kind of hoping for a little more meat on that bone, but I was like, it kind of makes sense. I think it needed to be an abrupt thing like that, but that's another thing that kind of jumped out. But yeah, really good.
Yeah, me too. And that's kind of basically how the episode ends as well. The TV episode ends. I do like that abruptness of it, and the fact that it's not a good ending for the character. Like, it's not. I mean, he's found guilty. It's a very difficult thing to watch, because by that point we know what he's gone through. We know what the pieces of it are. We know that it's not a clear-cut, like, good, bad situation. It's just a very difficult position to be in, a very difficult situation that he was in, and that the military was in prosecuting him and court-martialing him. And for it to end that way it's a downer. It's like, it's a bit of a downer, and it's something that, I don't know. It's something that, the abruptness really helps hammer it home just how, I don't want to say it's bleak necessarily, but it's kind of bleak.
Yeah,
It's kind of just a downer ending, and we are left to kind of infer what comes next for everyone involved.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yep. Of course, you can watch The Rack on Vudu or on digital anywhere. I think it's just available to rent or buy on all the digital platforms, I believe. Tiny, what did you end up rating this on Letterboxd?
What did I give it? Actually, I don't remember. I think I gave it like at least 4 stars. Let me look. It was like, maybe I watched like a month ago.
Yeah.
Hang on, where's my diary? I gave it 3.5 stars.
Nice. As did I. We both gave it 3.5 stars. Yeah, and it's very, very solid. Do you remember anything about 7 Days in May and how it compares to this? Like, if I can throw that wrench at you completely.
I'm trying to remember 7 Days in May.
Yeah, it was more of a political thriller, where it was, a U.S. Army colonel alerts the president of a planned military coup against him. I rated it 4 stars, and you rated it a number of stars that are escaping me right now because I can't find it.
That's right. Was it Kirk Douglas?
Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, yep, Ava Gardner,
Yeah,
Edmond O'Brien, of course, as I said before, Martin Balsam.
yeah,
Yeah.
That one was good. I think maybe I liked that one a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
A little more thrillerish.
Mm-hmm.
Little more production value to that one. But
Yeah.
yeah.
More suspenseful and yeah, I totally get that. Yeah.
Right.
I'm trying to find if you actually even yeah, okay, yes, you rated it 4 stars. There we go.
Yeah, okay. Well, that works out.
Yep, there we go.
I'm not crazy.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can kind of wind things down a little bit here. Tiny, where can people find you and your shows? What it was, the Obsessive Viewer and Tower Junkies? Is that it?
Yeah.
Where can we find you online and those shows?
Those shows can be found, again, you can download them on any podcatcher. You can go to ovpodcast.com, go to the website. Matt has some writing on there as well. That's really good.
Thank you.
And towerjunkiespod.com. That's the other one, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.